The Archbishop Desmond Tutu is mostly known to the world for his highly prominent role in the campaign against apartheid in South Africa. This role was internationally recognized by the awarding of the 1984 Nobel Peace Prize. In more recent years, Tutu continued to speak out on other social ills, bedevilling democratic South Africa, including xenophobia and homophobia. Let's take this discussion further. Then we're now joined by founder and executive director of Access Chapter 2, Steve Letsike. Very good afternoon to you. Always good to see you. Thanks for giving us your time, Steve.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Good afternoon to the viewers of SABC.
You know, Steve, to be very honest, the truth about it is that the church hasn't always been kind to the gay community. In fact, historically, we've seen even the Bible, being really quite, I'd use the term horrible to the gay community. How important was it to have somebody like Archbishop Desmond Tutu being really an active, what can I say, someone who stood for the community and vocally so? And in fact, we also understood that his daughter got married in a same-sex union. What was the significance of that for you, where a church leader came out openly to say, I do actually stand by this community?
No, indeed. I mean, if you realize that we have a legacy of prejudice, of discrimination, and of exclusion, in the society, in the church, in many kind of settings. And if we are to reflect on having a leader like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who came out, who spoke truth, and I think the most important thing is recognizing the fact that he spoke truth. He spoke about his own understanding of humanity, of love, embracing people and one another, not only just on the basis of race, on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. So these are intersections that in his social justice activism, he drew closer to what is godly and what is understood for that. And I think for us, it signals hope, it signals allyship, solidarity, but a true understanding of what coexistence is for humanity. And Archbishop represented that element of hope for LGBTI people. No, he then stood up. He spoke out against many people who oppressed and used and abused their power, to oppress others. And I think he was a great example to us as LGBTI community. And I think we celebrate his life, we honor his life, and we appreciate the fact that he not only just stood out for many out people, but also for his own daughter when she was outcasted, and even in the church, and the fact that she had to be revoked her own priesteship in 2016, and Archbishop stood up and spoke about not serving a homophobic God or even going to a homophobic heaven for that matter. And I think that represents a true honest of power, of understanding why we exist on this very same earth.
On that particular topic then, Steve, how do we continue that legacy or anti-homophobia legacy when in truth, and I'm sure you're aware, and I know you've spoken quite a bit on it too, we still do live in a society that is quite homophobic. Look at the other extremes in other parts of Africa. But, one of the things that we know in South Africa happens, and I know you talk about it quite often, is this corrective rape, for example. Things like that, extreme homophobia that the community is faced with. I mean, let's talk about how we move from here. He started it like as a church leader to say, I am not going to allow homophobia. But now he's gone. Now the baton has to move on, and there needs to be people who are still as vocal and fighting for the rights of the gay community. Let's talk to that. How do we then continue that?
I think think there's great lessons in reflecting on the past.
Yeah.
And I think society, religious leaders, and even cultural leaders needs to reflect on what are the things that we need to unlearn and what are the things that we need to do to fight for others. I mean, if you're a leader and you're not fighting for anybody, it is meaningless. And I think we need to be honest about that. And I think a lot of great leaders have to reflect on their role around, leadership that represents everybody. Now, how do we do that? And I think there's been an educational roam that needs to continue, and Archbishop had done so in a very exceptional manner. And I think we need to ensure we create space for conversation, space for reflection, but space for also reconciliating with our own self and learnings that we do. Now, he ran campaigns. He was voiced not only just even about some of the injustices. When the policies such as Civil Union Act was enacted, he had his own view and he contributed towards those views as well publicly. So I think we need to create space where leaders also need to create those spaces, because they occupy spaces of power.
Yeah.
To create that change. So education is key. Championing change is key, but also unlearning some of the wrong things that we have learned, but also calling out or condemning acts that may oppress others.
Yeah.
So we really have to go to the crux of ensuring that we do not cause any more harm to already broken society that we live in, but also doing just and doing the right thing.
You talk about calling out, and I want to go back to something that I'd spoken about briefly in terms of the fact that, other parts of Africa haven't necessarily moved on in terms of giving rights to the LGBTQ plus community. You might remember that, the fact that the Archbishop was calling out homophobia, he became, I don't want to use the word unpopular, because I think he's been popular throughout, but there were some criticisms. I mean, a fellow Anglican Bishop, Emmanuel Chukwuma from Nigeria, in fact, called him spiritually dead, for example. So, you would find people who are, I'll use the term staunch Christians, who believe that, the Bible must be followed, and even where there are issues, like if we're talking about homophobia, for example, that it should be followed to the T. How do we turn the tide on that? And are there still leaders who are going to call out, the homophobia in other parts of the continent? I mean, we look at the fact that not much has changed in some parts of Africa.
You see, change doesn't happen overnight, and I think we need to accept that.
Yeah.
When you have few allies that speak out and that speak power and that speaks the truth, they are more likely to be subjected to the very same discrimination or this very same, isolation. Like South Africa, when South Africa participates in the global political spaces, in Africa, many countries like Nigeria, like Swaziland, like Zimbabwe, they continue to isolate South Africa for its own foreign policy. Now, we are ought to understand that speaking truth is what we need to continue doing, and even upholding our own constitution. Now, when you're isolated, there's nothing wrong. Yes, you might be alone, but you still have to stick to the truth. And we believe, and it is my own view, there is hope. There's many more leaders who speak out, like Archbishop Tutu did, and we believe that they must not stop. We know them, we see them, and we appreciate them, because life was not necessarily just about individual, but for all, because this is the earth we live in, this is the world we live in. We make it or we break it. And those who contribute to breaking it, we see them, we know them. Yeah. And we are not going to even entertain oppression and make it right. Oppression is never right. We've seen it when it happened during apartheid. We've seen it when sexism is taking over, the stones of patriarchy are still turning, and we are still fighting for gender equality. We are still fighting for racial equality. We are still also fighting for respect for human rights, for LGBTI person, for person with disability. So change will happen at a time where human behavior changes.
Yeah.
One thing that we know, our freedom is not something that we can just expect to come easily. People fought for it, and we all have to continue doing so.
Yeah.
So those who really think that those who are speaking the truth must be isolated, they will not be isolated. We will continue withstanding those who speak the truth by our sides.
You know, you talk about change happens progressively and slowly, and sometimes I find difficulty in that. I mean, let's look at, for example, something that, you know, I'm directly affected by, which is racism, you know, for example. And I often think that we massage people into being, you know, not being a homophobe, not being racist, is just is what any decent human being should be. That's what you should be. And I'm very concerned about the fact that we tend to massage people into not be. This is an aggression. Being homophobic is an aggression. Being racist is an aggression. Yeah. And I feel as though sometimes it is met with this, oh well, you know, shame. It comes as it comes. Change comes slowly. And I wonder if that's the attitude that you know we should be having. And as a representative of the LG community, I wonder if, you know, you're not seeing it the way that I see it, in that we shouldn't be so light and nice about some of these issues.
I actually see it in that way. I think we all have to be accountable for our own behavior. It is why we have laws. Without any doubt, I'm a strong believer that law enforcement must be enforced in the right manner. We have a constitution to uphold, or that means we may run the risk of squandering the constitution. You may not say, or you cannot say, that people have got the right to life, that the constitution is the supreme law of this country, but you don't implement it. How else are you going to ensure that law takes its course, or the rights takes its course without testing them? You ought to do so. So which then means those who are perpetrators of violence, the abusers, must be held accountable. I pay no exception to that. Secondly, you are realizing that colonialization has taught many things and have criminalized, have even slaved the mentality in the way we think, which then means when you deal with social issues, you also are ought to then say, how do you change societal behavior? And this is work in effort. The reason why we put effort on education, the reason why we put effort on awareness is to change the social behavior. I do not necessarily want to mix those who oppress versus those who do not understand. And those are two different things. And even if you don't understand, it is no excuse to abuse anybody or to oppress anybody. You take your time to unlearn your behavior and you change it in a fast manner, because it may affect you, it may affect your loved ones. So for me, I think the compassion, the humanity is something that we still have to implement in all our efforts, but even rights that are oppressed or abused must never be taken lightly, and everybody must account for that. So I think for us, we need to be able to distinguish that.
All right, Steve, it's always a pleasure having you with us. Thanks very much to you for giving us your time.
Thank you.